another great episode here at IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Wes Bryan, and in today's episode, we're continuing through our series in VMware. That's right, we're coming back at you with more VMware Certified Professional version 6. We've been looking at virtual machines the last few episodes here. Joining me back in the studios is none other than Mr. Don Pizzette. Don, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, Wes, ready to dive right back into virtual machines. And if you watched our last few episodes, you know we covered things like how to create a virtual machine and all the various settings that we can put in place on the VMs and stuff that we can do with them. Well, in this episode, we're going to kind of continue on, except instead of making changes to the virtual machine, we're going to talk about how we can make changes to groups of VMs, or even just to save some time. We got a few different technologies to cover here that are certainly optional, certainly ones you don't have to do. We've already covered everything you need to know to create a virtual machine, but in real life land, there's certain things we can put in place that will save us time and make it more efficient to manage multiple virtual machines. And the first one that I want to talk about is a technology that's called a vApp. And vApp is short for a virtual application. And what vApps let us do is they let us take virtual machines and group them together. Now, why would I want to group VMs together? Well, normally it's because I want to manage them together. If I have virtual machines that are related to each other, then I might want to be able to manage their resources or do things like that to them as a group. And I know they're related. What does that even mean, right? Well, what we've got to do is we have to think about applications today a lot different than the old applications, right? Back in the golden day of computing, if I had an application, let's say I wanted to bring up a email server, right? Then what I likely did is brought up one physical server that ran an email server application on it, and that was the whole solution. So if I wanted, let's see if we can go old school here. If I wanted Lotus Domino, right? I brought up one server, I put Lotus Domino on there, and then my clients connected to it, and that was it. That server was an island. It was a standalone. Everything that it needed was right there in that one server. If I wanted to get Domino fired up, I pushed the power button on the server. And if I wanted to shut it down, I pushed the power button on the server, right? It was all independent. But in today's world, applications are rarely like that. If I bring up a mail server today, I need to plan for scale. I need to plan for growth. We have many more users today than we did back in the golden day, right? So what we have now is if I want to bring up a mail server, I might have one server that's an SMTP server. It's sending and receiving email. I might have another server that's a mailbox server. It's like a big database, and that's where all my mail is being stored. I might have another server that is doing spam filtering or regulatory compliance, email archiving, whatever. I might have another server that's a web server that provides web-based client activity for my end users, so they can just go to a web page to access their email instead of having a client. So now I'm up to 4 servers. I could have 4 servers powering my environment, and are they independent? No. If one of them were to fail, the whole environment breaks down. If the mailbox database server goes offline, does it matter that my web server is up and people can get to the web client? No, because they can't get to their mailbox. If the web client goes down, does it matter that the database is up? Because the clients can't get to it. Well, you could argue that incoming and outgoing email could still flow, but if people can't get to their mailbox, that doesn't do them any good. So these are called related servers. There's 4 servers in my email solution. They're all important. Each one provides a role, and I need all 4 of them to work together. The problem is vSphere has no way to know that. The guys at VMware that wrote all this software, they don't know what applications you run. They've created the infrastructure here for you to use, but they don't know how you're going to use it. And when you bring up 2 servers, you might have one that's called MailWeb01 and another one that's MailDB01, but they don't know those are email servers. They have no clue. So we have to have a way to tell VMware, tell vSphere that, hey, these 2 servers, they're related. They're tied to each other. If I'm powering one on, I need the other one on too. If I'm doing vMotion to move one from one side to another, to one side of hardware, I want to move them together. I want to bring them along with each other. And that's a big part of having a virtual app, is grouping these things together. All right. Fortunately, it's pretty easy to do this. If we dive into the vCenter screen, we can get this created. Now, I'm doing it in vCenter here, which means it can work across multiple servers. You can do this on standalone ESX boxes also. So if you just have a regular ESXi box, you can still create a vApp. You lose some of the functionality. Obviously, it's not going to help you with vMotion because you're standalone. But as far as being able to manage resources, power on, power off, that kind of stuff, you'll be able to do that right within the vApp. And what I can do is I can browse into my hosts and clusters. And in the virtual machine episodes, we created 2 VMs, right? A database server and a web server. So these are the 2 that we created. Now, as far as vSphere is concerned, those are 2 independent machines. If one is up, that doesn't affect the other one in any way. Or if the other one is shut down, it doesn't matter, right? These are independent machines, and maybe they are, right? Or maybe this is something like Amazon.com, right? When you go to Amazon.com, what do? You go to a web page. So they've obviously got a web server. And then you search their product database. And so they've got a product database somewhere. And then when you buy something, you swipe a credit card. So there's some kind of payment processor in the background. And there's more than likely business intelligence going on because they do recommended items. Don recently bought X-Files Season 1 on DVD. Hey, maybe you should buy Season 2. It's a recommended item, right? That might not be a critical component. If that fails, my rest of my environment might still work. I just don't get a recommendation. But these are all different components that are a part of it. So we've got to tell vSphere what's linked together. Let's pick something a little more simple. I'll do WordPress, right? WordPress is the world's most popular content management system. It powers something like 30% of the internet today is powered by WordPress-based websites. So if I want to deploy WordPress, at a minimum, I'm going to have two components. You can have a lot more, but at a minimum, you have two. You'll have a web server, which is what your clients will access, and then the web server has to reach out to a database server, which is where all your web page content is stored. Now, if the web server goes down, people can't get to your site. If the database server goes down, they can get to the web page, but all the pages are empty because the content is being served from the database. So I need both of them. I can't just have one. The whole thing is broken if I'm missing even one component, so I need them both. So I can group them together into a virtual application. Step one is to create the vApp, right? So I'm going to right-click on my host up here, and I'm going to go up to New vApp. And if you look, you'll see you've got two choices. New vApp, which is what I want, and New vApp from library. Now, I haven't talked about libraries in this show yet, right? So this is kind of the first time we've really seen it. The best way to describe a library is a data store. We saw data stores earlier that we could put our virtual machines in a data store or even ISO images in a data store and they'd be ready to go. So if a library is a data store, then why not just say new vApp from a data store, right? Well, libraries are intended to be used a little differently than data stores. With data stores, we expect live data to be in there. I could have virtual machines in a data store and actually run the virtual machine right from that data store. That's the intention. With a library, that's more like cold storage. I'm sticking things in there until I need them. I'm not running things from the library. I'm just storing them in the library. And probably in some kind of generic format that's ready to be cloned over and over and over again. Because you can't always just clone a server a certain way. Sometimes you got to take some preparation to get that ready. So that's what that is. And we'll see libraries a little later because I want to show you guys clones and templates this episode. So we'll come back and visit libraries again. But for right now, I'm just going to do a new vApp. When I go to create the new vApp, it gives me two choices. I can create a new vApp or I can clone an existing vApp. Now, I know it seems kind of redundant. Didn't we just see new vApp from library? Well, we did. And technically, clone an existing vApp. The existing vApp could be in the library. This would be the same option. But this actually opens us up to one other option, which is I might have another vApp that is live and running right now. And it's not in the library. And I want to clone that. Right, what would be a scenario where we'd use that? Well, maybe one day a developer calls me and says, hey, Don, I want to try something out. I got this new idea. I think it'll be great. I'm going to try it out on the site. And I say, no, you're not, right? That's our production website. You can't experiment on the production website. Let me make you a clone. Let me give you a sandbox environment where you can test it out. And so I could clone the existing production vApp, the main one that's running our app. I could clone that. And if it's got a database server and a web server and a file server or whatever else, it's cloning all of that. And I can drop it into a sandbox and give the developer access. Now the developer has an exact clone of my production vApp, and so they can do their experiment. If it works, then it'll work in production. If it doesn't work, then we just saved ourselves some customer-facing downtime because they broke this dev environment, they didn't break the production environment. So that's where cloning an existing vApp can be really handy. But I don't have any vApps, so I need to create a new one. So I'm going to go up here and just choose to create a new vApp. All right, then I need to give it a name. And if this is going to be a WordPress site, I'll just call it WordPress. You might call it your production website or the URL for the website, whatever it is. So this might be lab.itpro.tv or whatever. You give it a name that you can recognize and know what it means. And then I need to pick a data center. I've only got one, so that's easy. But if you have more than one data center, you'd pick the appropriate one for where you want this vApp to reside. Knowing that you can always move it later And if you clone the vApp, you can obviously deploy it to another data center if you want to, so you got a lot of flexibility down the road. Then we get this screen, and technically I don't have to do anything on this screen. I could just hit next. But what this is allowing me to do is to set resource allocations for the vApp. Now, we saw this screen before on the individual virtual machines. When we were creating our VMs and we went into the VM options, you could actually set resource allocations for a VM. You could set limits to how much CPU and memory they can consume, and you could set reservations for how much memory or CPU utilization was set aside specifically for that VM. Well, here we can do it on the vApp also. Except here it's a little different. It's more like a pool of resources, right? And all the VMs inside of it can feed off of this one set of settings, right? And so this kind of trickles down to the VMs in the pool. So we may not want to manage our resources on the individual apps, in the individual servers themselves, but manage them at the app level. So you can do it right here. If you do it here, you don't necessarily need to configure it on the VMs. If you do configure it on the VMs, that overrides these settings, right? So the VM settings will override the vApp settings. So I'm just going to leave it here at the defaults, which are pretty much no limits. And then we can finish that up, and it's going to create the vApp. Now, creating the vApp is not really anything too amazing. If you think about what I just did, if you took out all the Don talking parts, I just ran the wizard, gave it a name, and hit finish, right? So what I basically see here is very similar to a folder, right? Here's the vApp that I created, WordPress. And inside of it is nothing. It's an empty vApp, and it's just sitting there, right? You can create folders too, and so, well, really you see the folders on the vCenter side. So if I were to go up here under vCenter, I can create folders. And a folder is a way that we can group resources together too, right? Except with a folder, there's no real way to manage those resources. It's just organization for the UI, for the user interface, right? Not really anything special on the VMs. The vApp, on the other hand, we can actually manage the virtual machines using that vApp, and you can do it right from here. Unfortunately, the vApp's not terribly useful until you put something in it, and mine is empty. So when I click on the vApp, you see just a whole lot of nothing here. It's really easy to get stuff in the vApp, though. You just drag and drop it. So if my WordPress environment needs this database server and needs this web server, I can just take the database server, drag it, and drop it right into that vApp. And then I can take my web server and I can do the same thing. I'm just going to drag it and drop it right into the vApp, and now they're in there. I can take them out the same way. You can drag them and drop them out of the vApp if you want, and now they're not a part of it anymore. So it's easy to move resources in and out. But now that these are both inside of the WordPress vApp, now vSphere knows, oh, these two VMs are related. If one goes down, the other one's probably broken. Or if one is experiencing problems, the other one might be affected too. It knows to handle them together. And when I go to do a migration or something, I might not want to migrate just one of them. I might want to migrate the entire vApp and move these servers together over to another set of hardware. Now they're a team.
Don, once you put those in that app there, does that mean that when you control the resources at the app level, automatically vSphere knows, hey, we got to manage these virtual machines?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, those are going to trickle down, unless they've been overridden, right? Because you can override at the VM level if you want, and there's times. If I look here, right, a database server is going to have some disk I/O needs that are special to database servers. A web server is not going to have those disk I/O needs, because a web server is going to try and cache everything in RAM and do it from RAM instead of disk I/O. A database server needs a lot of RAM too, because it's doing indexes and other things that it caches into RAM. So these two servers are very different. So I might need to go in and configure things on the VM themselves. But whenever possible, I should be doing things up at the vApp level, because that's going to give me consistent management of the VMs inside of it. And now that I've got something in there, I can look over here and I start to see a little more information being populated. Well, a lot of this is still blank because I haven't truly configured it yet. But down here I can see that my health state is normal, my vApp state is stopped, my vApp is not running, and I can see my related objects down here. So I've got a couple of data stores and a virtual network that are now involved in this vApp. These are things the vApp depends on. If I lose access to the shared data store, something is going to be broken inside of this vApp. If I lose access to the ISO data store, something is going to be broken inside of this vApp. Something depends on that. The ISO data store means I probably still have a CD inserted into the virtual drive on one of these boxes. If I were to unmount those, then that dependency would go away for the vApp. But now I can start to view it for the vApp as a whole, and that's what's really important. Now, normally if I want to power on a virtual machine, I could just right-click on the VM. So if I take like Web01 and right-click, I can go to Power, and I can power it on, right? And that's going to power on just that little web server and get that thing powered up and going. But I can also go up here to my vApp, and when you right-click on a vApp, see how I've got a power option here? But instead of powering on a single virtual machine, it's going to power on the entire vApp. The web server and the database server will both come up. I can create new virtual machines right into the vApp as opposed to creating them externally and dragging them in. You can create them right from here. So we'll see a lot of the same options that we have at the host level brought into the vApp. And you'll see some options that are from the guest level brought into the vApp. So in a lot of ways, the vApp is a blend between host settings and VM or guest settings, kind of all merged together. But you'll also see where we can clone it. So when that developer calls me and says, man, I want to experiment with something, but I don't want to do it in production, I can say, hey, no problem. Just calm down. I'll go here. I'll clone this. I'm going to clone this vApp, and now I can give you access to the clone, and you can experiment to your heart's content. If you break it, no big deal. Production is safe.
And Don, what happens if, let's say in this case, maybe you decide that you need a recommendation server, like back to your Amazon example, you need another component within this WordPress or this vApp. Is it just a matter of creating the VM and dragging and dropping like you just did?
Yeah, you can do it that way, right? You create the VM, drag and drop it in there. If you've already got it, you can create it from a template or whatever, or you can create it right in the vApp, right? So if I were to come in here and right-click on WordPress and go to New Virtual Machine like that, it's going to create it already in the vApp. So that kind of saves me a little bit of effort there. All right, now a couple other things about this vApp that make it a little special. Notice over here, I told it that the vApp was called WordPress. See how it's got a product, version, vendor. What are those? Well, when you create a vApp, you might be creating the vApp for you, or you might be creating it for distribution out to other people. This might be some appliance that you're going to sell to other companies. And so you can actually track the version number, the product and the vendor of the virtual app, so that when you distribute it out, people know if they have the latest version. And when you create a new version of that vApp, it might have a new database server and a new web server because they've been updated, and you replace the entire vApp. So instead of doing some kind of in-place upgrade, you just swap out the vApp as a whole. Right? Now, your database, you need that data coming from somewhere, but everything else could be swapped out and it's no big deal. So when you start to work with these, if I jump under Manage and you start to take a look at the settings under Manage, you'll see where we've got tags and permissions and scheduled tasks. These are all applying to the vApp as a whole, and as we define these become a part of that package, and so we can redistribute that. We can export it, and you might have noticed that option when I right-clicked on the vApp. There's this OVF template, deploy a template or export a template. If you create an OVF, that is a single file that's generated that contains the entire vApp, and you can take it to other VMware environments. You can actually take it to VirtualBox, Microsoft Hyper-V. They all support OVFs, and you can import it in, and now your vApp is running on an entirely different infrastructure. It's pretty neat stuff. So that developer who wants a test environment, maybe I don't have enough room on my production server, so I export it as an OVF, and then I send that to them. And they can fire up their own virtualization software. Maybe they have VMware Workstation or VMware Fusion on their own machine, and they can fire up the vApp right there and get it up and running and do their experiments right in their own system. Okay. We can also do, if we go to the vApp and go down to Edit Settings, the settings for the vApp will come up. And in the settings for the vApp, here's where I'll see the CPU resources and memory resources. Those are things that we saw earlier. You'll also see IP allocation. Well, if you're going to be cloning this, you don't want duplicate IPs on your network. And so you can come in and customize those settings to make it so that you get IPs that are unique to this system. All right. But then down here, this is where I get the product name, the version, and so on. So maybe my product here is WordPress, and this is version 4.1. I think 4.2 or 4.3 is the latest. So I put whatever that version is, and I might come in and say the full version is 4.1.3, so I can keep track of that, and the product URL, whatever that happens to be, wordpress.org, and the vendor, I don't know what they call themselves. We'll just say it's WordPress Inc. Although I'm making it, so I could say that I'm the vendor. This is my distribution of WordPress that I'm creating. So you come in and you specify these settings, though, and that's going to make it where if I distribute this to other people, they'll know what version it is, and I keep track of it. And if I start to modify it and rebuild it, I can increase these values. And then once those are increased, then we get what we need. Now, Up here up top, under deployment, it wasn't letting me edit those IP settings because they were never defined in the first place. But down here under authoring, that's where I'm going to see the IP allocation scheme. And we can set the machines to use DHCP. That's usually the best. That's what you want. Or you can say OVF environment, and then it'll use the default settings from wherever you're importing it. So you can specify some of that as well as other settings right in here. So kind of neat to get those set up the way that you need. And once that's all done, now we'll start to see a little bit more here on our summary. So see how mine shows this is the WordPress product, version 4.1. The vendor, I probably should have put myself for the vendor there because it's not like they made this vApp. But now we start to see that. And if I start powering on these machines and getting them to do what they need to do, I'll see CPU and memory utilization that are combined for those virtual machines. All right, so vApps, just a great way to manage these components when they're together. I can power them on, power them off, do all those things. It's now being managed as a cohesive unit. That's what vApps are all about. All right, the other thing that I want to talk about are clones and templates, right? We talk about libraries a little bit, and clones and templates usually go in the library. Clones. If I have a running server or a running vApp, and somebody wants to experiment, try something new, mess around with it, it's better to give them a clone than the real thing. A clone is just a copy. We can create a copy of a virtual machine or a vApp and give somebody access to it and they can experiment. And so I showed you guys that when I right-clicked on the vApp, and I've got the clone menu right there. And so I can clone and off we go. Or if I've broken my vApp, maybe I broke this WordPress one, this is my development vApp. Well, I can always right-click on it and create a new vApp and bring in a new vApp from the library. And I can clone it back over here from the library if I've got it. Or we saw if we ran it, we could create a vApp. Actually, this kind of highlights that we can do nested vApps too. I forgot to mention that. You might have multiple applications inside of a single portfolio. I've never used that in production, but you certainly can do it. But cloning is really easy to do. When you clone, there's two destinations. The first option is to clone and make it live. I might need a second web server, and I need it right now. My server's getting overwhelmed. I need a second server, but I don't want it to go through all the configuration mess for it. So I could just take Web 01, and I could right-click on it and clone to a virtual machine. That'll create a new virtual machine, copy the hard drives, and get it ready to power on. So it'll already have the web server configured, it'll already have the web pages loaded on it, and it's ready to rock. I just need to add it to DNS or add it to my load balancer or however it is that I'm handling my web access, and now I've got another web server. So if I reach the limits of what I can scale up to, this is how I can quickly scale out. I can add more web servers. So cloning is a great way to do that. There are some little problems with cloning though. If you're cloning Linux boxes, it works great. If your IPs are set for DHCP and you're just cloning them out, each machine will come up and you've got machines in no time, it works wonderful. If you're cloning Windows machines though, you run into some problems, and Wes, you're nodding. You've dealt with it, right?
Yeah, I have. I'm just taking a guess here. I bet it's going to be the security identifiers going to cause conflicts.
Absolutely, yeah. So even if a Windows machine's set for DHCP, when that second machine boots up, it'll get a different address. But Windows tracks a security identifier, a little numeric, well, it's alphanumeric string that is really long that identifies that machine. And even if you change its name and change its IP and join it to a different domain, like its SID is still the same deep down underneath, and you'll get duplicates and conflicts as a result, and it causes a lot of problems. So a Windows machine has to be prepared before you can just clone it, right? If you clone it, it's going to be an exact clone. And as long as they're in two different environments, like a production environment and a test environment, that's okay. But if I need to clone that Windows machine and have it right there side by side with the other one, right? I'm trying to increase my capacity, I can't just clone that, right? I need to get it prepared. And the better way to do that is to use a template, okay? What you can do is you can clone a machine. So like I could clone this web server. I could right-click on it, go to clone virtual machine. Create a clone and move it to an isolated network. And then I could power Windows on, log into Windows, and Microsoft has this utility called sysprep. And the sysprep utility is packaged with Windows. You can run it, and it strips out the security identifier and all the unique data for that server, and it makes the server generic. They call it generalizing the server. And then it shuts it down, because you can't run without all that information. And while that machine is shut down, I can now turn it into a template. And that template, I can clone as many times as I want, because when that machine boots up, it's going to notice that it's missing a SID, and it'll generate a new one. And so now I can create 1,000 clones of that, and they'll all have different SIDs and be happy. That's what templates are really for, is creating these generic kind of boilerplate models of a server that you need that you can then clone as many times as you want. So when I right-click on Web01 and choose to clone it, I can clone it to a virtual machine that would be a live machine, and there's times where I want to do that, or I can clone it right to a template. If I choose clone to template, it's going to make the template right here on this ESX host. If I have a standalone server, that's probably fine with me. But if I've got multiple servers, then I probably want to clone it to a library. And that way I can access that template from any of my ESX boxes, not just this one. My problem is going to be that I don't have a library. I haven't created any, right? So I need to create a library before I can do that. But if I just clone to a template, I can always move the template to the library after I create it, right? So I'm going to create a template here that I'll just call like my generic web server, right? So this is just going to be my generic web server. If I ever need one, this is the template that I'm going to use. And I'll go ahead and hit next. And it's going to ask me to pick a compute resource. And right now I'm working on ESX host 01. And let's see, operation not allowed because of the current state of the host. Uh-oh, I might be disconnected from my data store. Oh, actually, I see the problem. So when I pick my host, I'm getting warnings down here about them not being suitable. And this one says, device CD DVD drive uses backing, and it's tied to the VMware tools. And the VMware tools are tied to ESX host 01. I need to get that ISO image out of there before I try and clone this thing to a template. That's important because you can be tied to resources that wouldn't be available on another machine. So I need to fix that. I'm kind of glad that came up. It's a mistake I make in real life all the time. So I'm going to go in here and disconnect that ISO image. And you have to be careful kind of how these are set. So on the CD DVD drive, I can flip that to like host or client device. And technically the host device is tied to this one host, but as long as I don't connect it, I'll be okay. So that one should be fine, and that should solve that problem. So let me wait a second while that takes effect, and looks good. So I'll go ahead and clone to a template again. And this time when I go to clone it to a template, I can come in and give it a name, generic web server. And then when I pick a resource, we should be a little bit better off. There we go. So now I get my compatibility check succeeded, and I can move forward and start to create that template. Now, when I go to create it, it's going to ask me where to put it, and this is where I'm going to see my data stores. I don't have a library to put it in, so it's just going to put it in one of my regular data stores. And that's technically okay, but the data stores are normally nice, fast storage, and I'm wasting fast storage with a template. A template's never going to be powered on, so it's really wasting that. I'd rather put it on older storage that wasn't like, it was SATA storage. It was slower, cheaper, and I could have a lot more of it, right? Anytime I decommission a virtual machine, I don't normally delete it. I normally move it to a library. It's cheaper, older storage that I've got a ton of, so I can stick it over there, and if anything ever happens where I need that machine back, I can go and get it again, right? That's the advantage. But here, I just have my data store, so maybe I'll put it here on my regular internal data store. And it is giving me a warning down here. Copying this virtual machine will cause loss of snapshots at the destination, right? It's going to clone the virtual machine as it is right now, not the snapshots. We're going to lose those snapshots, and we have to lose them because the snapshots actually contain RAM footprints that might not work on the other servers when we go to it. So that's going to knock that out, but that's fine with me. All right, and so then it's going to finish up and create that template. And now that I've got the template, when I go to create a new virtual machine, instead of creating it from scratch, I can create it from the template. And now I don't have to install the operating system. I don't have to configure the web server. I don't have to put my HTML files on there. They're all already set up. I just spin up the machine and it's ready to go.
Don, with the library, you said that it's accessible from, to multiple ESX hosts. Where is the library actually stored? And another question to that would be, is it using some kind of distributed replication or something?
So this is going to be kind of a funny answer because the library is actually stored in a data store. And I know I said we don't want to put the VMs in a data store, and here I'm saying the library is in a data store. Well, what you're going to do is you're going to create a data store just for your library. And it'll usually be somewhere where it's storage that you don't necessarily care about. But I mean, you can put it on really fast storage. Maybe money is no object, which usually means you work for the government. And so you want to put it on really fast storage, fine. And if that's the case, you might not even want to create a data store. You might want to just, a library, you might just want to put it in the data store. But with a library, you can create a distributed library. The library is defined in vCenter. And that's why all of your ESXi boxes that are in vCenter are going to be able to see it. And so if it's distributed, well, that usually just means that the data store is on a SAN, and that all the ESX boxes can see it because they can all see the SAN. That's how we make that available. So if you want to see that, here, let me show you creating a library. I'm going to jump back to my home. And under the home screen here, as you kind of look down at all the junk you've got, we've got our vCenter inventory lists. And inside of vCenter inventory, you'll see all the different things that you can create, including content libraries. All right, we've got VM templates and folders. That would be ones that are created inside of our regular system, but I want content libraries. And when I go into content libraries, I don't have any, right? Because we haven't created any. So I just need to whip one up to actually have a library in place. And so if I scroll down a little bit here, we've got create a new content library right here. And so I can create that. And so I'll call this maybe like VM template storage. Oops, I am typing. There we go. Apparently my demands on the server are too great. There we go. So VM template storage, and it's going to ask me the vCenter server that's going to control it. So the library is actually defined in vCenter, but it's got to have storage somewhere. And so on the next screen, it's going to ask me, oh, actually, I'm wrong. It's on the next screen. So on this screen, it's going to ask me to configure the library. On the next one, it's going to ask me where the storage is. And you've got to add storage. You can have storage from more than one place if you want. But here it's asking me, is this going to be a local content library? In other words, one that's designed for this particular data center. Or is it one that I want anybody to be able to connect to? I may have multiple vCenter deployments out there. And so I don't want this to be tied just to this one vCenter deployment. You can create a subscription, a subscribed content library. So you can have a centralized library that's shared throughout your entire environment. All right? But if you don't need that, you can just do a local content library, and we can choose to publish our content externally so other people can connect to us, or we can connect to somebody else's. In my case, we're just going to do a local one, and I'm not going to mess with publishing that out. Now it's going to ask where the storage is coming from. And you can do NFS, and NFS is a great way to do it. With NFS, we could have the library stored on a different server somewhere, and because it's NFS, we can connect from our own clients to easily put things in and out of that library because it's just NFS. That's easy, right? Anything can access it. Or we can use a data store. If it's a data store, that limits us because we can only access the data store from inside of vCenter or ESXi, right? So from our management tools for VMware. So NFS is better if you have an NFS location available and you can provide that, or you can just pick a data store. Now, I'm going to pick a data store here just because I think one of mine is NFS, isn't it? Yeah, this one. The shared data store I have is already NFS, so I'll just pick it. We'll see. It might complain, but I think it'll be okay with that. All right, so there we go. It's going to finish up. It's just got the settings right there, and I can finish it. So now I have a content library. And so when I come here to my content library, I can see I've got this VM template storage, and that's basically going to be on my low-cost storage, my SATA or whatever, something inexpensive, and now I can start throwing data in there. And you can customize it a little bit, but there's not much to customize on the thing. It's really just a storage repository. And so you can go to related objects, and here's where you'll see all the stuff that's inside of it. And now we can start filling it up with templates. You create these templates, you throw them in here, and then anytime you need them, they're available. And because it's attached to vCenter, all the ESXi boxes that are managed by vCenter will be able to see this library and be able to draw from it. So great way to put those templates somewhere and not waste resources.
Don, thank you for all that information on our vApps here. It does look like we're running to the end of another episode, though. So before we sign off, do you got any additional words?
I think that's about it on this. Just remember, like Linux boxes, they love being cloned. They really have no problem. Even if you have a bunch of Linux VMs that all have the same name, they don't care. You don't want duplicate IPs though, so make sure you use DHCP, and that means that your app has to be expecting new members to join where it doesn't know the IP. So there is a little bit of work on the development side to get this to work properly. It's not as easy as just cloning the machines and saying you're done. So there's that. On the Windows side, always remember those SIDs, they get in the way. And then if you're running other operating systems, just be aware they may have things in there that need to be unique. You may have things like database credentials that you don't want to store in the template. Those are all considerations you have to have when you build those templates. The act of creating the template, super easy. Getting your operating system set up to be ready to be cloned, that's a little bit of work. So just know there's more. That's not on the exam, but it is in real life, so it's something you'll need to know.
Well, Don, we appreciate having you in the IT Pro TV studios, and we appreciate you, the viewer out there, signing out for IT Pro TV. I've been your host, Wes Bryan.
And I'm Don Pizzette.
And we'll see you next time.